Sarah had always loved the peaceful rhythm of her life. Nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood where rows of neat houses stood side by side, her small backyard farm was an oasis of calm and life. Chickens clucked softly in their coop. Goats munched lazily on fresh grass, and ducks splashed happily in their little pond. To Sarah, these animals weren't just pets. They were family, a living link to a simpler, freer way of life. She woke early every morning to feed them, talk to them, and tend to their needs. Her neighbors often smiled warmly at the sight, admiring the charm of her small farm amid the cookie-cutter homes. Sarah had felt proud of what she'd built, grateful for the balance between community and personal freedom. But on this particular morning, something was off. As she stepped outside, the early sun casting soft golden light across the yard, Sarah noticed a small envelope wedged beneath her front door. Its stark white color and official stamp made her heart skip. She picked it up, a nice, sinking feeling settling deep in her chest. The letter was from the Homeowners Association. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the crisp paper. The words were cold, unfamiliar, and terrifying in their finality. Effective immediately. All farm animals are banned within the community. Any violation of this regulation will result in strict enforcement actions, including removal of animals and further consequences. This measure has been enacted to preserve the community standards and protect property values. Sarah blinked, rereading the lines in disbelief. Ban her animals? Just like that. No warning, no discussion. Her mind raced. What did further consequences mean? She felt an icy knot tighten in her stomach. She looked around her yard. The gentle clucking of the chickens, the soft bleating of the goats, and the scene that had always brought her peace suddenly felt fragile, under threat. Over the next few hours, Sarah tried to reach the HOA board members. Phones went unanswered. Emails bounced back. Her neighbors seemed to avoid eye contact, some whispering quietly when they thought she wasn't looking. The community she'd known for years felt like it was shifting beneath her feet. That evening, Sarah found herself drawn to the edge of her property, staring at the coop bathed in fading light. The air carried a strange stillness, as if the farm animals themselves sensed the storm brewing. She ran her hand over the weathered wood of the fence, fighting back tears. How had it come to this? One day, everything was fine. The next, her entire way of life was at risk. She vowed she wouldn't give up her animals without a fight. But as night fell, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker was unfolding behind the HOA's rigid rules. Something no one was talking about. In the distance, the faint glow of porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. From somewhere nearby, the faint sound of voices echoed, low and urgent. Sarah strained to listen. Protect the community at any cost. The words, whispered on the wind, sent a chill down her spine. The quiet farm she'd loved so much was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battleground. The next morning, Sarah's mind was restless. That letter from the HOA burned in her thoughts like a warning siren. She knew she had to act, to face the board, to demand answers, to stand for her farm and her animals. When the HOA meeting was announced for that evening, Sarah prepared herself with determination. She printed copies of photos showing how her animals never disturbed the neighbors, wrote down points about animal care and community values, and rehearsed what she would say. The community center hall filled slowly with homeowners, mostly familiar faces, some nodding in sympathy, others staring blankly, as if waiting for the inevitable. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium when her name was called. The board officers sat behind a long table, their expressions unreadable. beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The lead officer, a sharply dressed man named Mr. Grayson, cleared his throat. "We are here to enforce the new community regulations," he began, voice cold and steady. "The ban on farm animals is final." Sarah's heart pounded. But why? Why this sudden ban? And why no warning? My animals cause no harm, and many neighbors enjoy the peaceful charm they bring. Mr. Grayson's smile was thin and brittle. "We act in the best interests of the community. Property values, health standards, and general harmony must be preserved. This decision is not open to debate." Murmurs rippled through the room. Sarah felt a growing knot of tension tighten her chest. "I propose compromises," she pressed on, like building enclosures, limiting noise, regular inspections. Surely there's room for understanding. The officers exchanged glances, their gazes icy. "No exceptions," said another officer, a woman with sharp eyes. "We have consulted experts. The ban is absolute." Sarah's voice faltered as a chilling thought crept in. "What happens if I don't comply?" Mr. Grayson's smile widened, just slightly, but enough to freeze the room. "You will face strict enforcement actions, which may include removal of the animals, fines, and other consequences deemed necessary." The words echoed ominously. Sarah's stomach churned. The meeting ended abruptly, the officers dismissing the crowd, like a wave brushing away leaves. As people filed out, Sarah noticed some neighbors avoiding her gaze. A few whispered quietly, but no one stepped forward to offer support. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, but it did little to calm her racing mind. She glanced back toward her house, where her animals slept, unaware of the storm closing in. Suddenly, a voice behind her startled her. "You're brave, standing up there." It was Mark, a neighbor who had quietly kept a few rabbits in his yard. "But you have to be careful. The HOA, they're serious, more serious than you think." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" Mark lowered his voice. "There are rumors. Animals disappearing, pets taken away in the dead of night, people too scared to say anything." Sarah's eyes widened. "Disappear? That can't be true." "I wish it wasn't," Mark said grimly, "but no one wants to get involved. The officers have ways of making people stay quiet." Her heart hammered. Could the HOA really be crossing a line? What had she gotten herself into? That night, as she lay awake, Sarah's mind replayed the meeting's cold finality and Mark's dark warnings. The line between neighborly governance and something far more sinister blurred. She stared into the darkness, a silent promise forming. No matter what it took, she wouldn't let them take her animals without a fight. But deep down, a question lingered like a shadow. How far were they willing to go? Days passed, but the shadow cast by the HOA's new rules only grew heavier over Sarah's world. The once vibrant energy of her farm felt muted, like the very air was thick with unspoken fear. Sarah had begun to notice subtle changes in the neighborhood. Conversations hushed when she approached. Eyes darted away, avoiding her gaze. Even those who once smiled warmly now seemed distant, wary, almost afraid. One afternoon, while watering her garden, Sarah overheard hushed voices from behind the fence. Curious and cautious, she edged closer. "Did you hear about Mrs. Lang's dog? Gone without a trace," whispered one neighbor. "No way. Another one? That's the third this month," replied the other, voice trembling. Sarah's heart pounded. These weren't just rumors anymore. Pets were disappearing, and no one dared speak openly. Determined to find out more, Sarah reached out quietly to Mark, the neighbor who had warned her before. They met one evening at the local cafe. a neutral ground away from prying ears. Mark leaned in, his expression grave. The HOA officers are different. They aren't just enforcing rules. They're enforcing silence. Silence? Sarah echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Mark said. People who resist, who complain, things start to happen. Animals vanish. Some neighbors get threatening letters or fines. Some even leave town. Sarah swallowed hard. This feels more like intimidation than governance. Mark nodded. Exactly. But there's more. I've heard whispers about a secret group within. The HOA. They meet in private, make decisions that aren't recorded in official minutes. No one outside knows who they really are. A chill crept up Sarah's spine. She glanced around the bustling cafe, as if the shadows themselves might be. Listening. Why haven't you told anyone? She asked. Fear, Mark said simply. No one trusts the HOA anymore. And speaking out, it could mean losing everything. That night, Sarah locked her doors and peered out at her yard, bathed in moonlight. The chickens slept quietly, oblivious to the storm gathering beyond the fence. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. Over the next few days, strange things happened. Footsteps echoed outside her house late at night. Faint flickers of light danced near her coop. But whenever she looked, nothing was there. She found subtle scratches on the fence and strange markings in the dirt. Was someone scouting her property? Preparing for something? Her phone vibrated with an anonymous text. Remove the animals. Last warning. Her hands trembled as she read it. The quiet farm life she once cherished was unraveling, thread by thread. Yet, amidst the fear, Sarah discovered a small group of neighbors who quietly supported her cause. People tired of living in fear, who still believed in community and fairness. Together, they began sharing stories, pooling information, and discussing ways to stand up to the HOA's ruthless tactics. But the officers were watching. One night, as Sarah and her allies met in her backyard, under the cover of darkness, distant headlights suddenly flooded the street. A car slowly circled the block before speeding away. Sarah's heart raced. The message was clear. The battle lines were drawn. She looked at her friends, determination hardening in their eyes. Whatever the cost, Sarah vowed to fight, not just for her animals, but for everyone trapped under the HOA's shadow. But as whispers grew louder and the threats more tangible, one terrifying question loomed. What would happen if she lost? The sun had barely risen when Sarah's world shattered. She stepped outside, expecting the familiar sounds of her farm. The gentle clucking of chickens. The soft bleats of goats greeting the morning. But an eerie silence greeted her instead. Her breath hitched. She hurried toward the chicken coop. Heart pounding with dread, the door hung ajar, broken and splintered. Inside, devastation. Feathers scattered like fallen snow across the yard. Empty nests. The unmistakable absence of life. Her chickens, gone. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But there was no time for grief. Next, she checked the goat pen. A cruel gash in the fence revealed a path where the animals could have been dragged away. Only a few hoof prints in the mud were left behind, leading toward the edge of her property. Her heart pounded. Someone had been here, under cover of darkness, and they hadn't just come to warn. A note pinned to the gate caught her eye, written in cold block letters. This is your final warning. Remove all farm animals immediately, or face the consequences. Sarah's hands shook as she crumpled the paper. Her home was no longer safe. She reached for her phone to call Mark, but it slipped from her trembling fingers and cracked on the pavement. The day blurred into chaos. Sarah contacted animal control, but they insisted the matter was a private HOA dispute. Neighbors whispered that the HOA officers had the authority to enforce the ban by any means necessary. Sarah realized she was on her own. Over the next few hours, Sarah searched for her missing animals, posting flyers and asking around, but no one had seen anything. Then, late that evening, a call from an unknown number sent a chill through her veins. A distorted voice said only, "Compliance is not optional." The line went dead. Sarah's resolve hardened. She refused to be bullied into submission. That night, sleep evaded her. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside, made her flinch. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence. She raced outside to find her garden tools thrown about, the dirt overturned. On the ground, another note. Next time, it won't be just tools. Fear was no longer enough to stop Sarah. She reached out to a lawyer, desperate for help, but even the lawyer warned her. HOA disputes rarely ended well. Officers wielded power, and the law often sided with them. As Sarah lay awake, the weight of the threat pressed down. The farm she'd nurtured, the animals she loved, were now pawns in a battle much bigger than herself. And somewhere in the shadows, the officers watched, waiting for her next move. The days after the attack blurred into a whirlwind of fear, frustration, and determination for Sarah. Her home had become a fortress, every window locked and every door chained. But beneath the surface, a nagging question clawed at her mind. Why was the HOA so ruthless? What were they really after? One afternoon, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While meeting secretly with Mark in a dim corner of the local library, he pulled out a folder, thick with photocopied documents. "Look at this," he whispered, sliding the papers across the table. "I managed to get my hands on some HOA records, hidden, agendas, contracts, and land deals that aren't public." Sarah's eyes widened as she sifted through the pages. At first, it seemed like routine property management, but then she spotted something alarming. A plan to sell several parcels of the neighborhood, including her own property, to a large commercial developer. "This isn't just about animals," Sarah said slowly, her voice shaking. "They want to clear the land, get rid of anything that might scare off investors or buyers." Mark nodded grimly. "Exactly. The farm animals, the open spaces, those are obstacles to their real goal. If they can scare homeowners into selling or forcing them out, they can bulldoze the whole area and build commercial complexes or luxury condos." The pieces fell into place. The sudden animal ban, the brutal enforcement. It wasn't just about community standards. It was a calculated move to seize control. But there was more. The HOA board members weren't acting alone. Who else is involved? Sarah asked. Behind closed doors. They've been meeting with corporate reps, city officials, people with power and money. The secrecy is why no one knows the whole story. It's a conspiracy. Sarah felt a cold wave of betrayal. This was bigger than a neighborhood dispute. It was corruption, greed, and manipulation, masked by the veneer of local governance. That night, Sarah stared at the faded photo of her animals pinned to her fridge. Her family, her life. She realized the fight was no longer just about saving her farm. It was about saving the soul of her community. But exposing the conspiracy wouldn't be easy. Her phone buzzed with a new message. "Stop digging or you'll lose everything." The threats were escalating. Determined, Sarah began recording every encounter, every threatening message, and gathering testimonies from supportive neighbors. She reached out to local journalists, hoping to shine a light on the darkness enveloping her community. Meanwhile, the HOA officers intensified their campaign of intimidation, Strange cars lurked near her home. Anonymous letters arrived, warning her to back down. One evening, a late visitor startled her. A woman she didn't recognize, face partially hidden by shadows, handed Sarah an envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah's backyard, taken from above, surveillance footage, uncomfortably clear. A whispered warning came with it. "We're watching." Fear and anger mingled in Sarah's chest. She wasn't just fighting a board of officers anymore. She was up against a powerful, hidden force, determined to break her spirit. But Sarah's resolve only deepened. If this was a war, she would meet it head on. Because if she lost, it wouldn't just be her farm. It would be everyone's freedom slipping away, one dark secret at a time. The weight of the invisible war pressed down on Sarah like a storm about to break. The photograph left on her doorstep had unsettled her deeply. Someone was watching her every move. But how far would they go to silence her? Days later, the HOA board sent an official letter, stamped and sealed with an ominous finality: remove all farm animals and cease any opposition to community regulations by Friday, or face legal action, including eviction proceedings. Sarah read the words over and over, the deadline burning in her mind. Eviction, losing her home, losing everything she had fought for. Her small band of allies grew anxious, some urging caution. "Maybe it's time to give up, Sarah," Mark said quietly during one of their secret meetings. "They're too powerful. The law isn't on our side." But Sarah shook her head, fierce determination lighting her eyes. "I can't back down. Now, if we give in, this will just happen again. To someone else, somewhere else. We have to expose them." Her lawyer was blunt but honest. HOA boards have broad authority, especially when backed by city officials and developers. Fighting. This will be long, costly, and uncertain. You might lose your home before any court hears your case. But Sarah wasn't deterred. She began preparing for battle, gathering evidence, interviewing neighbors willing to speak, and recording every threatening message. Meanwhile, tension in the neighborhood thickened. One night, Sarah returned from a meeting to find her mailbox ripped open, papers strewn across the sidewalk. Her home security cameras caught blurred figures lurking just beyond the porch light. A deep unease settled in her gut. She confided in her closest friend Laura, who whispered, "This is bigger than you thought. People have disappeared before, Sarah. It's not just animals they're after." Sarah shivered, but refused to show fear. The deadline loomed. Friday arrived with heavy clouds and cold rain. That afternoon, the HOA officers showed up at Sarah's door, several of them, faces stern and unreadable. "We're here to enforce the community's decision," Mr. Grayson announced. "You must remove all animals immediately." Sarah stood her ground. "I won't comply until this is resolved." Legally, one officer smirked. "That's your choice. But know this. We have the means to make you comply." Sarah's heart raced. "What does that mean?" Before anyone could answer, a sudden noise broke the tense silence. A car screeched down the street, tires spinning on wet asphalt. In that instant, a neighbor called out from across the street, "The police are here." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The HOA officers exchanged uneasy glances. Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights bathed the quiet street. The arrival of law enforcement created a momentary reprieve, but Sarah knew it was just a pause. After the officers left, a chilling message was left behind on her door. "This is not over." That night, as rain hammered against her windows, Sarah lay awake, thoughts racing. She was fighting an entrenched system, backed by powerful forces that would stop at nothing. But somewhere in the darkness, a spark of hope remained. A secret document Sarah had found, hidden deep within HOA files, hinted at corruption so vast it could bring down the entire board. If she could get it to the right people, her fight might finally tip the scales. But time was running out, and the next move could cost her everything. The morning after the confrontation, Sarah woke with a sense of purpose that hadn't left her since the fight began. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her neighborhood, but she was no longer just fighting for her animals. She was fighting to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of lies. She pulled out the secret document she had found, buried in a stack of HOA files. During a risky late-night search, it detailed financial transactions, undisclosed meetings with developers, and under-the-table deals that directly implicated several HOA officers. In a massive land grab scheme, her hands trembled as she scanned the pages, the weight of what she held sinking in. This was the proof she needed, evidence that could expose the HOA's true intentions and possibly save her home and those of her neighbors. But there was a problem. Releasing this information without the right platform could put her and her allies in even greater danger. Sarah contacted a trusted local journalist, Emma, who had a reputation for digging into corruption. Emma agreed to meet Sarah at a quiet cafe downtown as they sat in a shadowed booth. Sarah slid the documents across the table. "This is everything I've found. The HOA is trying to force residents out to make way for commercial development. They're lying about the animal ban. It's just a cover." Emma's eyes widened. If this gets out, it could blow the whole case wide open. But you have to be careful. They'll come after you harder than ever. Sarah nodded. "I know, but I can't back down now." Over the next few days, Sarah and Emma worked in secret, preparing an exposé that would reveal the HOA's corruption and the intimidation tactics used against homeowners. Meanwhile, tensions in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. Some neighbors began to speak out, emboldened by Sarah's bravery, while others distanced themselves, afraid of retaliation. One evening, Sarah received a late-night call from Mark. His voice was urgent and shaky. "Sarah, you need to be careful. I think they know you're talking to the press. Last night someone tried to break into my house." Fear clenched at her heart, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she rallied her small group of allies, preparing for whatever came next. Days later, as the exposé was set to publish, Sarah received an anonymous tip, a hidden meeting where the HOA officers and developers planned their next move. Determined, Sarah and Mark decided to sneak in and gather proof. Under cover of darkness, they approached the meeting location, a secluded community center room, locked tight against outsiders. With trembling hands, Sarah recorded the conversation with her phone, capturing voices discussing evictions, bribes, and strategies to silence dissenters. The evidence was irrefutable, but as they slipped away, a sharp noise behind them signaled danger. "Stop! Who's there?" Heart pounding, Sarah and Mark sprinted through the shadows, barely escaping the grasp of the unseen pursuers. Back at her home, Sarah realized the stakes had never been higher. The fight for her farm, her animals, and her community was no longer just a battle. It was a war. And now, with the truth in her hands, everything was about to change. The dawn broke with a chilling stillness, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the weight of the past weeks pressing on her shoulders, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The exposé was published overnight. The local news outlets picked up the story quickly. Headlines screaming about HOA, a corruption, intimidation, and a secret land grab that threatened to displace dozens of families. Sarah's name was front and center, a symbol of resistance and courage. But the victory was bittersweet. As the community rallied behind her, the threats escalated beyond anything she had imagined. That same night, Sarah awoke to a blood-curdling noise outside. Heart pounding, she rushed to the window and saw figures moving stealthily near the barn. She grabbed her phone, ready to call for help, but the screen flickered and died. A victim of a sudden power outage. Before she could react further, the barn door creaked open. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled outside into the darkness, flashlight in hand. Her eyes widened in horror. Her beloved animals were nowhere to be found. Panic surged as she noticed a trail of disturbed earth leading into the woods. She followed, heart hammering, adrenaline blurring the cold night air. Deep in the shadows, she stumbled upon a grisly scene. Several of her farm animals lying lifeless, victims of a cruel and calculated act. Tears blurred her vision. Rage igniting a fierce determination, she realized the term unalived wasn't just a rumor whispered in fear. It was a horrifying reality. Sarah returned home, shaking, and immediately contacted the police. But the officers were dismissive, citing lack of evidence and jurisdiction, leaving Sarah feeling abandoned and vulnerable. Refusing to be broken, Sarah organized a community vigil for the lost animals, inviting neighbors to stand together in defiance of the HOA's terror tactics. The event galvanized the neighborhood, sparking protests and calls for official investigations. Pressure mounted on the HOA board, forcing them to answer uncomfortable questions, and eventually leading to a city council hearing. At the hearing, Sarah presented her evidence, the documents, recordings and testimonies. The HOA officers were confronted with the truth, their power beginning to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. In a final twist, an anonymous whistleblower from within the HOA came forward, revealing more about the corrupt dealings and illegal actions. The officers were removed, investigations launched, and the community began healing. Sarah's farm animals were remembered as symbols of resistance, their loss fueling a movement to protect homeowners' rights and preserve the spirit of the neighborhood. In the end, Sarah's fight wasn't just about a farm or animals. It was about standing up against corruption, fear, and injustice, and in the darkest moments, finding the courage to fight back, no matter the cost.